They weren't just actors, they were illusions, trapped in fake romances, silenced by studio lies. These 10 gay stars were forced to hide the love that made them human. Behind the glitz was pain. Behind the fame, silence. Hollywood sold us a dream by erasing their truth. Today, we honor what they were never allowed to say out loud. If their stories moved you, subscribe, share your thoughts below, and help us rewrite history with honesty, dignity, and pride. Because remembering is a form of justice. Back when Hollywood was silent, its stars had to be too. And none were silenced more cruelly than Ramon Novarro. A Mexican-American actor who lit up the silent screen in the 1920s, Novarro was everything the studio system dreamed of. Exotic, charming, sensual. They built him up to be the next Valentino, the perfect leading man. But behind the camera, Ramon wasn't chasing actresses. He was in love with men. And that love had no place in the scripts written for him. Ramon had real relationships, deep ones. He was romantically involved with journalist Herbert Howe, who worked closely with the studios, a double-edged sword. On one hand, Howe protected him. On the other, their love had to exist in coded language and stolen moments. There were others too. Fleeting affairs, long-term bonds, but none that could ever be shown or spoken of in the light. Because MGM, like all the major studios, controlled every inch of their star's image. They orchestrated fake romances with actresses, published puff pieces, staged red carpet appearances with women Ramon barely knew. He was forced to live two lives, the seductive lover on screen and the secretive, careful man off it, always looking over his shoulder. Every real feeling had to be buried. Every kiss, every connection, kept behind locked doors. And the price? It was soul deep. Ramon became withdrawn, lonely. As the talkies rose and his fame declined, he tried to live more authentically, but the world still wasn't ready. In 1968, long after the spotlight had dimmed, he invited two young men to his home. They violently attacked him, and he didn't survive. The tabloids called it a scandal, but it was a hate crime. And worse, it was predictable, because Ramon Novarro had spent his life being told that loving honestly meant dying dangerously. Hollywood made him a fantasy, but it denied him the right to be a man in love. How many stories like his have we never heard, because the truth didn't fit the studio script? Let us know what you think in the comments, because the more we remember, the less we let the silence win. Cary Grant was everything a leading man was supposed to be. Tall, dashing, charming, perfectly tailored. The kind of guy who could walk into a room and make every man wish they were him. And every woman wish he'd notice them. But here's the thing. It might not have been the women who had his attention. Long before red carpets and Instagram, Cary Grant was building a legacy and a closet big enough to fit a studio system inside it. He moved in with fellow actor Randolph Scott in the early 1930s. And not for a weekend. They lived together, shared a beach house, a bank account, a dog, and let's be honest, probably more than just groceries. The two were photographed sunbathing, cooking, lounging shirtless. Fan magazines called it bachelor bliss. Hollywood called it a problem. Studios panicked. A romantic lead can't be too close to another man. Not in that way. So they forced Cary into a series of relationships with women, including multiple marriages that always seemed more like studio events than love stories. His sexuality became part of the marketing machine, carefully ambiguous, strategically edited. And for decades it worked. People saw what they were told to see, the ultimate ladies' man. But behind the tuxedo and the movie star grin was a man who may have spent his entire life never being allowed to love out loud. There were whispers, of course. Other relationships with men, including costume designer Ori Kelly, who detailed their affair in his memoir. But Cary never confirmed anything. He played it smart. He played it safe. He played a role. Even when the cameras weren't rolling. And maybe that's the saddest part. That one of the greatest actors of all time spent his life giving the world love stories while hiding his own. Hollywood didn't just build Cary Grant, it edited him, frame by frame, lover by lover, until all that was left was an icon, but not a man. What do you think Cary Grant's legacy would have looked like if he could have lived openly? Drop your thoughts below, because no one should have to act their whole life just to be accepted. There was a time when just saying his name made women blush. Rock Hudson wasn't just the leading man. He was the standard. Tall, masculine, impossibly handsome. The kind of guy who made every romantic line sound like prophecy. But Hollywood didn't just sell him as a lover. It sold him as the ultimate fantasy. The kind of man every woman wanted and every man was expected to be. But behind the fantasy was a truth that terrified the studio system. Because Rock Hudson was gay. And for the power players of 1950s Hollywood, that wasn't just inconvenient, it was dangerous. Studio executives didn't just know he was gay, they planned around it. Universal Pictures and his agent Henry Wilson built an image so carefully crafted it could have been trademarked. They picked out his clothes, chose who he could be seen with, and coached him on how to flirt with women. Every public smile, every red carpet, girlfriend, every strategically placed rumor, all designed to erase the part of him that wasn't marketable. And when whispers grew louder, they rushed him into a marriage with Phyllis Gates, his agent's secretary. The wedding was a publicity event, a fix, a lavender shield. Privately, Phyllis later admitted she confronted him about his sexuality. He didn't deny it, he just went quiet. That silence became his signature. Meanwhile, the truth played out in private. He shared a quiet, committed relationship with actor George Nader. They built a life behind closed doors, vacations, shared homes, secret parties in gay Hollywood's hidden corners. But none of it could exist on camera. None of it could be real to the public. Because in the eyes of the industry that made him, Rock wasn't allowed to be a man who loved other men. He was only allowed to play love, as long as it looked straight. And then came the reckoning. In 1985, when Rock Hudson announced he had AIDS, it sent shockwaves through America. Not just because of the diagnosis, but because it forced a nation to confront the truth. The heartthrob was human, and the secret he carried wasn't shameful. It was just hidden for far too long. Rock Hudson didn't just act in movies, he acted for his entire life. But in the end, it was the truth that made him unforgettable. It only took one headline to unravel everything. Tab Hunter arrested at gay party. Printed in bold. Spread like wildfire. And just like that, America's clean-cut teen idol, the golden boy of 1950s cinema, became a liability. The timing couldn't have been worse. Tab was at the peak of his fame, the face of innocence, the dream boyfriend, the perfect son your mother wished you'd bring home. But the truth? He wasn't dating the girls he smiled next to on magazine covers. He was in love with men. And unlike some of his peers who managed to keep their secrets quiet, Tab got outed, brutally. True or not, it didn't matter. The damage was instant. Studios freaked out, magazines pulled features, and his carefully crafted image as a clean-cut heartthrob began to unravel. So what did the studio do? They didn't ask if it was true. They asked how fast they could get him seen with a woman. Suddenly, Tab was dating Natalie Wood. They appeared on red carpets, laughed through photo shoots, gave charming interviews. But behind the smiles was a man trying to survive a system that punished him for being honest. Meanwhile, his real relationships, including a serious romance with actor Anthony Perkins, remained in the shadows. Tab once said they had to meet in secret, sneak through back doors, and never be seen in public together. Because two rising stars being seen alone was fine. Two young, handsome actors being seen together? That was a headline no studio wanted. And so Tab played the part until the script no longer worked. As the roles dried up, he turned to stage work, then eventually left Hollywood altogether. But years later, he did something extraordinary. He came back, not as a teen idol, but as a man finally ready to tell the truth. With the support of his partner of over 35 years, producer Alan Glazer, Tab released Tab Hunter Confidential. It wasn't a publicity stunt, it was a quiet act of revolution. In a world that had once tried to erase him, Tab chose visibility. He showed that love doesn't need permission, that dignity isn't given, it's reclaimed, and that even the most carefully crafted image can't compete with the power of living honestly. He didn't just survive Hollywood's closet, he kicked the door open and left the light on for the next generation. Tab Hunter wasn't just a star, he became a mirror, showing countless LGBTQ+ people that it's never too late to own your story. He was a master of silence in his films, in his life. And no silence cut deeper than the one Anthony Perkins was forced to live with, the silence around his love. On screen, he was unforgettable. In Psycho, he made Norman Bates so terrifying because he played him with such aching humanity. But what most audiences never knew was that the fear, the repression, the double life, it wasn't all acting. Anthony Perkins was gay. And Hollywood turned that into its most delicate operation. As a rising star in the 1950s, Perkins had the look. Tall, dark, soft-spoken. He was the type studios could market to teenage girls and desperate housewives, the sensitive alternative to the brawny macho men. But behind closed doors, he was deeply in love with another man, Tab Hunter. Their relationship wasn't a fling. It was real, sweet, serious, and full of possibility. But that possibility died the moment the press began to speculate. The studios stepped in immediately. Tab was pushed into fake relationships. Anthony was told to disappear from the story, and he did. From that moment on, his life became a script written by fear. He dated women for appearances. He let himself be photographed with actresses he barely knew. He accepted roles that reinforced the image of a lonely, straight man trapped in his own mind. Hollywood didn't just force Anthony Perkins to hide his truth. It weaponized it. Every time he played the oddball, the mama's boy, the man who couldn't connect, it let the studio keep him on screen without letting him be seen. He wasn't cast in romances. He wasn't allowed chemistry. His queerness became his character's weakness, never his own identity. Even his eventual marriage to Barry Berenson felt more like a ceasefire than freedom. He was a father, yes, a husband. But those who knew him said he never stopped carrying the weight of what he wasn't allowed to be. When he died of AIDS-related complications in 1992, the headlines barely mentioned who he really was. Because even in death, Hollywood still wasn't ready to talk about it. Anthony Perkins didn't get to live out loud. But the way he looked at the world, with fear, longing, and quiet rebellion, still speaks volumes. William Haynes was everything Hollywood wanted, until he became everything it feared. In the 1920s, he was one of MGM's biggest stars. Boyish charm, comedic timing, natural charisma. Audiences loved him. Studios banked on him. But William had a secret he wasn't hiding, at least not behind closed doors. He was gay, and he was in love. His partner was Jimmy Shields, a quiet, devoted man who shared his home, his life, and his heart. In an era when most queer actors lived in constant fear, William and Jimmy built a life together. Dinner parties, joint vacations, even photos that hinted at something more than friendship. Their relationship wasn't whispered. It was just unofficial. And that alone was enough to send the studio bosses into panic mode. Louis B. Mayer, the head of MGM, gave Haynes an ultimatum: end the relationship, marry a woman, or lose everything. William didn't flinch. He chose Jimmy, and Hollywood slammed the door behind him. His contracts vanished, his name disappeared from the marquees. Offers stopped coming. He had been one of the most bankable stars in the business, and within months, he was an outcast. Not because of scandal, but because he refused to lie. Most actors would have collapsed. William reinvented. He and Jimmy started an interior design company and built a new kind of legacy, decorating homes for Joan Crawford, Ronald Reagan, and Hollywood's elite. They were partners in love and in business for over 50 years. When Joan Crawford was asked which Hollywood couple had the most stable marriage, she didn't hesitate. William and Jimmy, she said. Hollywood tried to erase him, but couldn't touch what mattered most. William Haynes wasn't just a gay actor in the golden age. He was the first to say, "I won't hide, I won't pretend, I won't leave the man I love." What happens when Hollywood gives you everything except the right to love who you love? Montgomery Clift had it all: the beauty, the talent, the screen presence that made even the toughest critics go silent. He was the man studios built dreams around. Intense, poetic, and fragile in a way that made audiences want to protect him. But what they didn't see, and what Hollywood made sure they never saw, was the cost of becoming a symbol while erasing who you are. Montgomery Clift was gay, and his love stories, they were real, deep, human, but none of them made it to the screen because studios had other plans. They built him into a tragic heterosexual icon, the lonely heart, the misunderstood lover. They paired him with leading ladies he never touched off set. They fueled press stories about flings and heartbreaks that never happened. Meanwhile, his real relationships with men like choreographer Jerome Robbins and actor Jack Larson were kept in the shadows. Photos destroyed, names unspoken, feelings edited out. When Clift survived a car crash in 1956 that left his face partially paralyzed, the studios didn't back away. They leaned in. They cast him as haunted men, fallen idols, broken souls. His trauma became their brand. But the real wound wasn't physical. It was emotional, living in a world that praised his sensitivity but rejected its truth. He drank, he pushed people away, he became the roles they gave him because there was no room for the man he really was. He died young at 45 from the wear and tear of decades spent hiding in plain sight. Montgomery Clift didn't die because he was gay. He died because Hollywood taught him that being gay and being loved couldn't exist in the same mess. To the world, Dirk Bogarde was the perfect English gentleman. Elegant, mysterious, just distant enough to be intriguing. He played soldiers, lovers, aristocrats, always with a touch of restraint that critics called refined. But what audiences didn't see was the truth that defined his entire life. Dirk Bogarde was gay, and he spent more than 40 years hiding it. Not because he wanted to, but because the industry gave him no choice. His career exploded in the 1950s, just as Britain and Hollywood began exporting images of the ideal man: charming, brave, irresistibly straight. Dirk fit the mold too well, which made his truth a problem. So the studios did what they always did. They manufactured love affairs, sent him on publicity dates, planted gossip about leading ladies, and edited his private life out of every press tour. Behind closed doors, Dirk had already found the love of his life, Anthony Forwood, his manager and partner. They met in the 1940s and lived together for nearly 5 decades. They bought a home in Provence, raised dogs, took long drives in the countryside. They shared birthdays, losses, holidays, a whole life. But not once, not in interviews, not in public, not even in Dirk's memoirs, did he say the word partner. Instead, he called Anthony his manager, housemate, constant companion. Because even in moments of honesty, he was still protecting the lie that kept his career alive. And that silence, it wasn't peace, it was fear. He watched what happened to other actors who were suspected of being gay. Roles vanished, press turned, reputations shattered. So he stayed silent, but never stopped searching for ways to speak. In his later films, Victim, The Servant, Death in Venice, Dirk took on characters grappling with identity, repression, forbidden desire. It was no accident. He was using cinema to say what real life wouldn't let him. He didn't come out. He coded it in his work. It wasn't until after his death in 1999 that the full story came out, through letters, photographs, and quiet confirmations from close friends. And suddenly, all those years of elegant restraint made sense. Dirk Bogarde didn't just play hidden lives. He lived one. And in doing so, he became something Hollywood never planned for. A queer icon, not by declaration, but by endurance. What happens when you're too young, too honest, and too queer for Hollywood to control? Sal Mineo was just 17 when he stole the screen in Rebel Without a Cause. He wasn't the star, but he had the face, the fire, and the kind of vulnerability you couldn't fake. Audiences saw it. James Dean saw it. And for a moment, Sal seemed destined to become the next great leading man. But what Hollywood couldn't accept, and what the audience wasn't supposed to notice, was that Sal's performance wasn't all acting. He was gay. And his connection to James Dean wasn't just chemistry, it was longing. Real, raw, and deeply felt. Off-screen, they were close. Intimate, maybe more. And when Dean died, Sal never fully recovered. The studios tried to mold him into a heartthrob. They gave him beach movies, war dramas, romances. But the tension was always there. He didn't fit the straight-laced mold. He was too soft, too sensitive, too visibly different. Rumors swirled. His name started disappearing from casting lists. Directors hesitated. And when he was finally outed by tabloids in the late 60s, his career all but collapsed. He tried to fight back, returned to theater, explored darker roles, even directed. But the industry that once crowned him had moved on. And then came the most brutal chapter. In 1976, just as his career was showing signs of revival, Sal was tragically murdered outside his West Hollywood apartment. He was 37. The man who attacked him didn't know who he was, didn't care. To the world, it was just another gay man fatally stabbed on a quiet street. To those who loved him, it was the final blow in a life spent fighting for permission to be seen. Sal Mineo was one of the first actors to risk everything by living his truth. And he paid the price, with roles, with love, with his life. But what he left behind was bigger than any movie. A reminder that even in silence, queer presence matters. Let's end this list with a man who had it all, except the right to be real. Tyrone Power was golden, quite literally. The golden boy, the golden skin, the golden smile. He wasn't just famous, he was sculpted into stardom. Studios didn't just promote him, they mythologized him. On screen, he was the dashing romantic, the fearless soldier, the lover every woman wanted and every man was told to become. But off-screen, Tyrone lived with rumors he could never outrun. Throughout his career, whispers followed him quietly but persistently. Stories of deep male friendships, of private gatherings, of romantic attachments that didn't match the studio narrative. His relationships with men were never confirmed, but they were never convincingly denied either. Those close to him, assistants, insiders, even a few actors, spoke in coded terms about loyalties and attachments that stretched beyond the boundaries of friendship. And the studios noticed. 20th Century Fox worked overtime to protect his image. They arranged photo ops, monitored his appearances, and guided him through 3 marriages that fit the mold, even when they didn't fit the man. He was presented as the perfect leading man, while the truth, whatever it was, remained off-script. Power himself never spoke openly about his sexuality, and maybe he didn't dare. Not in an era when even suspicion could end a career. He died suddenly at 44, collapsing on a film set in Spain. The world mourned the legend, but the real man, the one behind the charm, the quiet, the carefully polished mask, faded into the background, just as he always had. Tyrone Power's story isn't tragic because we don't know the full truth. It's tragic because he may never have been allowed to live it. He was the final illusion in an era built on illusion, a symbol of beauty, grace, and silence, who may have spent his entire life just trying not to be seen too clearly. These were the stories Hollywood tried to bury. Not in storage, but in silence. Fake marriages, studio lies, careers shaped around who they couldn't be. They gave the world unforgettable characters, but never got to be the truest version of themselves. Some found quiet love. Others lived alone. But all of them paid the price for simply existing outside the script. So as their faces flicker across our screens, even now, let's remember what the cameras never showed. Their courage, their pain, and the love they weren't allowed to name. Which story stayed with you the most? Share it below and help make sure they're never erased again. Subscribe for more untold queer history from the silver screen.